Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Before we started, I was thinking there is this idea going behind that if you feel a little bit uneasy before giving a presentation, you should stand in that superhero pose for about 2 minutes, and that's supposed to kind of boost your confidence. And I was just thinking that that kind of goes with the topic. So my presentation won't be very technical, and I'm sorry for that, or you're welcome, depending which side of the scale you are. And it won't be very design thinking oriented, as in to the dot, but it will give you sort of like a welcome window to what the design methodology is, what it did already in the world, and how you can sort of use the basic ideas behind it. And it will give you a superpower as well. So let me just figure it out if that works. Perfect. Right, so this behind me is an incubator. And I don't have kids, so I've never seen one, especially with a real baby inside. But I remember seeing my niece being born, and she was in this normal cot in a hospital where you can see them through the glass. And even knowing that she was all right and she didn't have to be put in an incubator, I was terrified, and it wasn't even my daughter. So I can only assume, and I can only try to empathize with people who actually need to put their kids in this machine, because it must be scary for the parents. It must be scary for the kid as well. So those are some questions that we might try to answer using different methodologies. Maybe there is a way to make it better. And there is, or there will be, hopefully. Is that like area-oriented? Superhero. So more technical difficulties, which is planned, right? Very good. That kind of killed the momentum. But anyways, so that little cozy thing, that little sleeping bag that the babies are in is called an infant warmer. And obviously, I mean, hopefully you'll agree with me that this one looks less scary than the big incubator. And the story behind this one is that in Nepal, the mortality rate for newborns was very, very high. And I don't know why this topic was chosen in terms of a product design, but there was different groups working to find a cure for that. And people in offices somewhere in Silicon Valley or some other magical place like that, they were sort of going through research and checking pictures and trying to figure it out. And they figured that it's because energy and electricity is so expensive in Nepal that the incubators are not fully charged or not fully working, and that was for them it was the problem behind the high mortality rate. And then what design thinking and the group that was doing design thinking at the Stanford University figure out is they got a group of people and sent them to Nepal. Go, do your thing. So those designers actually went to Nepal and lived with the families. They became part of their daily life, daily routines. And they stayed with families that already had kids and with families that were expecting. So they were trying to sort of empathize with their situation and figure out what is this thing about electricity that the other designers are talking about, what is the real life that they need to struggle with, and how to compare it and how to figure out the answer to their problems. And what they figured out was that it's not the electricity, it's the fact that the villages are scattered around the whole area of Nepal, and they're very, very far away from hospitals. So when the baby is born, usually at home, because they don't have taxis to get them to the hospital. So when the baby is born, usually at home, they don't have enough time to get to the hospital to actually provide enough care for the baby, so it can get checked at the hospital. So the problem was not electricity at all. The problem was the distance and the lack of transportation. So obviously there will be different ways to cover that, but they figure out that little sleeping bag for the baby, when you can put your baby in, and on the way to the hospital, it will give enough support to actually last the journey and bring it to a proper, and put it into a proper equipment. So I think that's pretty super powerful. And this is how, in some areas of Africa, water is still being transported from places. And I've never tried it, actually. I don't think I would be good at it. But I assume that it's a hard task when you need to walk 5-10 kilometers and back and bring water. And probably they're much better on it because it's their culture. But there must be something. And people were wondering, will there be something that is easier, that's going to make it easier for them to do it? And yet again, a group of designers went to Africa. I don't remember which country exactly, but I can check it. So they went to Africa, and they were staying with those families and going with them on that water journey and getting to places and trying to balance that big ball on their heads. And this is what was the effect of their research. So instead of trying to figure out a new well or trying to put a big factory or something like that, they figure out a very easy to make a Wello water wheel that is easy to carry, and then you can put more water in it because it's easier. So it holds more water than your ball on your head. And it's easier for them, even kids can use it. It's cheap to manufacture, and that was the answer. But that answer was yet again only possible because they went in and they spent time with them and they tried to become part of their life. And this little horrifying picture is an operation performed on a very, very small newborn to fix something that they call club feet. And club feet is when you're born with your feet being sticking out. And obviously when kids develop, it's not a good thing to have. So previously, this was the only way to fix it, was to put a little baby through a horrendous experience of being operated on. And yet again, designers and doctors were trying to figure out a better way to fix it, especially for kids, because they're small and they're innocent. So they're trying to figure out a way how to tackle this problem, and this is what they came up with: a miracle brace. Yet again, cheap to manufacture. It's just a few pieces of plastic and maybe a leather to put the feet together, but it's easy. It's not scary. It's not an operation. You don't have to, as a parent, you don't have to worry about your kid that something will happen during the operation. It's not really expensive to manufacture yet again. And that was the answer. And to me, those stories are the proof that those superpowers actually work. And this is the base of design thinking. 5 stages. You can sort of use all of them. You can skip some of them. You can jump around. But there are only 3 main concepts that happen in those processes that are important for you to actually follow them and actually use design thinking. And only those 3 can create success, as we could see in those stories. The first one is empathy, and Paul touched upon this in his keynote. And empathy is something that I have a feeling that we're just as humanity learning that, because we all know about being sympathetic towards someone. We all know how it is to sit and say, oh, like, I sympathize with you. That's really a horrendous situation. But we're not really equipped with a lot of information on how to use empathy. And some people, and me included a while ago, I couldn't really grasp the fine difference between sympathy and empathy. As long as I was trying to listen, it was fine with me. But it wasn't that situation. I wasn't empathetic towards anyone, even if I was listening to them, because there was no feelings exchanged. And Alfred Adler, who was a psychotherapist, he defined it. It's the best definition that works for me. Hopefully it will work for some of you as well. That empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another. And it kind of covers some of the main senses, because we see, we listen, and we feel, obviously, hopefully all of us. And that's easy to remember for me, that whenever I'm in a situation when I talk to someone, I try to figure it out, and I think eyes, ears, and my heart. And I try to figure it out how it is for them to be in that situation. And obviously it's not an easy thing to do. So how we can do it, how we can sort of implement it. And it's something that, yet again, it's not easy to do, because, as Paul also mentioned, it's not that you're being screamed by your boss and then your brain immediately goes to the techniques that you can use. That's not how it works, and I'm still learning that as well. But sometimes when you keep remembering, and for me the definition works because I remember those 3 senses, and that definition brings another ways on how to tackle it. And all of those are actually used when we're doing and we're trying to figure out the answers to different problems using design thinking. Because if you don't know what people are going through, especially, for example, with this embrace warmer, if you don't know how they live, if you don't know what their problems are, you're never going to come up with a correct answer. So how to do it? You can assume a point of view from another person, and that's yet again not easy. None of those are easy, but life isn't really. But anyway, so you can try to assume the point of view of another person. So it's like trying to figure out, okay, if I was in that situation, what would be happening in my heart? What would be happening in my head? And you're trying to imagine you going, knowing yourself, knowing how you react to things. You're trying to imagine how it must feel. Hearing and listening, we're sort of used to listening to the conversation. Again, Paul mentioned it. He stole my subject. We're used to listen non-actively. We're immediately thinking about our answers, and sometimes we try to even fit them in between of what other people are saying without really hearing to their ideas and hearing whenever they're finished with their ideas. But if you stop for a second and if you hear and try to listen in between the lines, you will figure out that sometimes there are stories behind that. So the trick is to sort of dig deeper, ask questions, and hear the answers, and then put all of this together and figure out the whole situation. And then try to find the same feeling. Try to sort of find some situation that would be similar, and maybe try to figure it out whether it was similar. Ask another question to that person to try to combine those feelings and figure out if you're in the situation to empathize with them. And you probably know this guy. And those are some questions that we can ask to put ourselves in the situation. What do they hear? What do they think? What do they feel? There's something called empathy map, when you can draw a little person in the center and put all those in quadrants. And you can add, like, it doesn't have to be only hear and think. It might be what do they tackle with on their daily life? What are their problems? And those, obviously, we won't know what the actual situation is, because even with empathy, you can't be the same person, but we can try to be in their shoes, and that will help. And it's the same situation as Paul mentioned with this bike accident. Instead of coming out and screaming and not even naming the feelings that the dad was going through, it'll be, obviously there are situations where you can't do it, but it'll be much better to explain, because if you know that the daughter was scared, terrified as well, like she was falling off the bike, she might have hurt herself as well, so she might have been scared as well. It'll be much better to sort of turn the situation and be like, okay, so if she's scared, if I scream at her, it's not going to help her at all, it's not going to help me. So if we know what she's going through, we can sort of adjust the situation and figure out a solution for the problem, and then ask her to wear a helmet. So that's one. And this is yet another story that shows you how empathy can work. And it's a story of this designer from, yet again, Stanford University that was designing a series of MRI machines. And yet again, I never had an MRI, but I can only imagine that it's quite scary when people put you in a tube and you can't really hear anything and you're not supposed to move and you don't really know what's going on, or lights flashing or whatever happens inside. And he was specifically hired to design MRIs for kids. And when the whole project started, he actually went to one of those hospitals and was trying to sneak up on people and see how that works. And he was so proud of his work. He was like, oh, well, now I'm going to see this in action. I spent like half a year, whatever time, designing that. I'm going to see it in action now. And all he saw was a little girl being led by her parents. She was crying her eyes out. Her parents were trying to explain that it's just a medical procedure and nothing will happen to you. And at that very moment, and I can imagine that, I can empathize that the designer was terrified himself, because that was not his idea behind designing MRI machines. He did not want to make kids cry. He wanted to help kids, because MRIs are designed to figure out sickness and try to find a solution for it. So that was not his goal. And he realized that that was the exact mistake that he made. He didn't think that he was designing he knew he was designing for kids, but he didn't think to be in their shoes. And then what he did, he thought, okay, I'm gonna scratch the whole project, start all over again. And he invited a bunch of kids into an MRI machine room, gave him crayons, paints, plasticine, whatever they wanted to play with, and just let them loose. Let them paint the whole room. And that's how those started. And it's an MRI adventure series that is in a few hospitals in the US. And then when this project with newly renovated machines started, he went to the hospital, and he was a little bit cautious after his last opening. And he went in, and all he saw was kids running around and trying to play with it even before they went put on the bed. And there was this one situation when the kid was like, I want to go again, I want to go again. And that was the moment we thought, okay, so by assuming their mindset and assuming their point of view and trying to figure this out from their perspective, now he actually created something that wasn't scary, and the doctors could use it and find cures. So that's pretty cool. Another idea, another trait behind design thinking is vulnerability. And I really set myself up because I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, so bear with me. But that feeling, we all have it. We all have, even if we're not really aware of it. We are afraid to put ourselves forward. I'm afraid doing this presentation. I'm afraid even putting my project forward. And now the world is sort of changing, so it's more. We're more informed that you can feel that, and you can feel fear, but it's still something that a lot of us are not willing to accept, especially if you're from Poland and you went to school here, and all you had to do was to get your 5s on your certificate at the end, and it didn't matter really how you did this, and it didn't matter that at one test you got a 4 or a B if you're not from Poland. All that you needed to do was to get an A, get a 5. And then if you got a 4 once, it was like, oh, well, I don't know what we're going to do with you. You did not apply yourself. But no one, and that, first of all, you're afraid to fail. And second of all, that puts that fear in your eyes. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to go back home. I'm going to stop everything that I'm doing, stop all my hobbies and start studying. This is a little definition, and if you don't know Brenda Brown, I encourage you to search for her on YouTube. My research will be posted on my website, so I'll give you a link to it as well. And all the videos are there as well. That's her definition: uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And that emotional is really important as well, because it's not just exposure as in, I'm going to take my jacket off. It's the emotions that you're putting. And that is all that vulnerability is. We all feel that, so we're in the same boat. And yet again, how we can sort of tackle this, how we can figure it out so this doesn't limit us, and that allows us to actually use that vulnerability to figure out, yet again, an answer to a problem, whatever the problem might be. It might be embrace warmer, but it might be, I don't know, like what to wear in the morning. Or maybe it's just me. So you need to know yourself. And that's why I mentioned that the world is changing, and it's really good because now we're more aware of all the issues that are happening around, of the problems that people can have. We're getting more and more open to mental health and trying to figure that out. And therefore, or going to therapy, that used to be a big stigma. But without that, without all of that, without reading books about like non-violent communication and figuring out, oh, well, actually, I actually do that. So without trying to figure that out, without knowing yourself, you don't really know where you're good at. And that goes back to school as well, because you're trying to figure out where to go to university. You're like 19 and you're trying to figure out your life. And yet again, and then that stress comes back. But you don't really know if you don't study yourself during high school. The second thing is it's okay to fail mindset, which is really big in design thinking as well. And that mindset kind of pushes your boundaries, because if you accept the fact that you can fail, if you accept the fact that something may go wrong, you are not as much vulnerable to the negative effects of your failure, but also you're aware of the fact that you can learn from it. And you can see what went wrong, and you can analyze it, and you can make your next step, your next product, your next process, next decision better. And third, accept your flaws, which kind of goes with knowing yourself. If you know that you're not good at something, if you know that something is problematic for you, you can either try to fix it, and I would encourage it as well, but also you know that if you're not good at it, if you're not good at swimming, you're not going to get a medal, unless you train hard and all of that. But just jumping into the pool won't get you a medal. So as long as you know your boundaries, you know your flaws, or you know the things that you excel at, so you know yourself, then it's going to be better, and it's going to sort of shape your decisions in the future. And my personal favorite is from Pitch Perfect, and I don't know if you've seen the movie, but there's the scene when Fat Amy introduces herself, and they're like, "Well, you call yourself Fat Amy," and it's not even the fact that it was cut it a little bit. It's not even the fact that it was that she perceived that and she felt bad about her own vulnerability. It's the fact that she accepted it. She was aware how that makes other people feel, and she was like, "I'm gonna fight this. I'm gonna fight this." So she's my personal hero. So trust yourself. Trust that you know your talents, you know your flaws, and just push forward using that knowledge. And that's another personal story, showing you how vulnerability can sort of benefit you. Tim Ferriss, I don't know if you know, I think his first book was The 4-Hour Week, which is really big in businesses. And then he developed the Tools of Titan. So if you work in business, you probably know his books. But it wasn't till he actually spoke about his suicidal thoughts and the moment when he tried to commit suicide, when he gained people following him. And I don't mean following in the sense of like liking and in the sense of social media, but following people that would write to him that his confession changed their lives. So because he accepted and made his vulnerability aware, other people benefited from it. He benefited from it as well. And it wouldn't be possible if he wasn't brave enough, and if he didn't accept his flaws. So that's a little personal story from Tim Ferriss. And I encourage you to listen to his podcast as well about this, when he explains sort of his train of thoughts and how he arrived at the decision of not committing suicide and why it was important. And you can see that being vulnerable and accepting that will get you a step forward. And then it's just easy peasy. And a third one, courage. They all go together. All those things go together. Courage is probably now being introduced to schools with different projects and getting people or kids to do robotics and stuff, which when I was growing up, girls didn't do robotics. So I'm happy about that. And courage, not having the strength to go on. It's going when you don't have strength, and also accepting your vulnerability. So it's really easy to say, well, I don't know how to do it, and I don't want to do it because it makes me feel vulnerable. I don't have that courage. But if you go past it, yet again, you'll be one step forward. And if you have the courage to fail, if you have the courage to accept your vulnerability, if you have the courage to try and be someone else to figure out their problems, you're going to be a better designer. You're going to be a better a product owner. You're going to be a better human. So how? How we can achieve that? We can accept our vulnerability. We can stay open to failure, because if you fail, you're going to learn from your mistakes. And you can try and try again, and you can try and fail as many times as you want, because each failure is a lesson to you. And it's the same, if you think about it, it's the same in life. If you don't get into university, you always try to ask for the question sheet or whatever is used and try to figure out when you went wrong. If your relationship ends, you try to, after the excessive amount of chocolate, you try to figure it out what went wrong. And you're sort of trying to become aware of what you're looking for the next one and what you're looking in your next step, your next work, if your work was frustrating. So that failure is needed to actually grow, and that failure is needed to accept your flaws and accept your vulnerabilities as well. And how to do it, you can prototype, which is really big in design thinking. We do a lot of prototypes because each prototype is not as expensive as the final thing, and you can make a lot of them and see what features work, what features failed. You can try to improve not only your prototype, but try to improve the process that led to the prototype as well. So try to figure out where you went wrong in your courageous attempts, and same thing, try and try again to be better. And that's one of my favorite stories of Burt Munro. You might have seen the movie with Anthony Hopkins portraying him. And this guy from New Zealand, a big fan of motorcycles. And he really wanted to go across skipped my mind, a big salt flat thing in the U.S. He really wanted. They organize races there, and he really wanted to go there. He spent all his time working on his motorcycles. Back in New Zealand when he was still there, if he couldn't go past a certain speed, he would go back and work on that motorcycle again. And then he gathered all of his funds, went to the U.S. and tried to compete at that race. And he was quite old. I think he was about 68 when he tried to do that. And what happened was he came in there, and they said, "Well, you didn't pay your entrance fee." So, being normal, for me, I would be like, well, okay, I'm going to put the motorcycle back into the plane or whatever and just go back home. Well, I didn't pay the fee. What he did was he freaking jumped on that motorcycle and started racing without waiting for them to actually start the races. He was like, I'm going to do it on my own terms. And if I fail, I fail. I know I didn't pay or whatever, I didn't really qualify, but I'm going to do it. And he was the fastest. He wasn't even on the race, and he was still the fastest. He actually went in to break a couple records, so that's really good. You can watch the movie as well. It's called The Fastest Indian. That's how he called his motorcycle. A lot of love behind it. So I think that's good, because if he wasn't courageous enough to do it, and then if he didn't work on his motorcycles, he wouldn't be able to do it. So that's pretty great as well. There are some other inventions that happened as mistakes. I think my favorite one would be sticky notes, because they were trying to figure out an adhesive that wouldn't go out of the wall, and they figure out post-it notes when you can easily take them out. So that's going to be one of my favorites. Or potato chips. I don't know if you knew, potato chips actually were invented because a customer at a New York restaurant was sending the dishes back to the kitchen, and the chef was like, well, I've had enough. I'm going to just chop the potatoes, fry them in a big bowl of oil, and then sprinkle them with salt and send them back. And he thought he was being mean to the guest, and that came back. The guest came back saying, well, this was the best dish. So even if you're courageous, if you're going past your vulnerabilities and past your flaws, and you're just trying, you might come up with something great that people will use and love. So empathy, vulnerability, and courage will give you that. And even if it's not, it's always behind design thinking. But even if you don't follow design thinking or any other methodologies, those simple concepts are actually what makes us human. And I find that if I apply this, even talking to my coworkers or talking to my mom, this makes our relationship better. So that's pretty cool. And using that, we can all become superheroes. And I always wanted to be one, so I don't know. So thank you for me listening to me ramble about being a superhero and trying to figure out my dream. The research that I mentioned, all the movies, you can find them on my website after the conference. I encourage you to listen to Brenda Brown and her ideas behind vulnerability. She spent a lot of time doing research about that, and it's a wonderful research and wonderful presentation at TED Talk. Yet again, thank you for listening, and see you somewhere there. Thank you.